Right when you think the Quakes are down and out, especially like a game like last week, losing against such a weak opponent in St. Louis, the Quakes embrace the Goonies ethos and pull an upset victory against Western Conference leaders San Diego FC, away from home and becoming the first team in California to beat San Diego FC. It's these moments, these games, those last 10 minutes of biting your nails and seeing that blue smoke go up in front of you as the ref blows the final whistle that remind you why you love the Quakes and honestly make you feel like you're falling in love again for the first time. My name is Kevin, I'm joined by Luis and together with Quakesaholics. So I actually had the luck of being at this one. Luis, you are watching on TV, so we probably do have different viewpoints of this match for sure. I'll let you get into it first. What do you think of this match?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a fantastic result. I think that out of the couple remaining games that we had left, this is probably the one we saw the least or felt the least optimistic about. So to win that game, to get our first clean sheet in a really long time, especially with the lineup that we had as well, I thought it was such a great result.
Yeah, for me, after the St. Louis game, I felt like making playoffs was something that was no longer in just our hands. We were definitely going to be depending on other results. I do think, though, that with this victory, it definitely makes playoffs much more accessible. It makes it feel like we have control over our own destiny. We still do depend on other results, unfortunately, but this is probably one of the best results we can have going into the last two games. We can get in the starting 11. I feel like some things felt different, but also familiar. We did see a return to the 3-4-3. We saw a backline that was very young, Roberts, Munie, Floriani. Last time we saw this didn't go well for us. I think it was in the Austin game, right? And that was the game that, Roberts got subbed out within 20, 30 minutes. There was two individual mistakes there. So I think looking at the lineup, it was definitely a little bit scary to see that just because we haven't seen this combination since that last poor performance on the road. Seeing Rodriguez didn't even travel. He was listed as injured and then only having Bruno Wilson on the bench doesn't give the best confidence. But, I mean, as we saw in this game, they really pulled it off. Then in terms of the midfield, we saw more shakeups there. Benji Kikenovic playing that right wing back role. Buda playing the left wing back role. We're missing DeJuan Jones. Vitor Costa was on the bench. But then the midfield did feel a little bit more familiar if you look at this past month for the Quakes, Ian Harkes and Ronaldo Vieira. And then up top, the trio we've seen for most stretches of this season, Chicho Arango, Josef Martinez, and Cristiano Espinosa. And the story for this game was definitely the defense and goalkeeping heroics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we could stop there. I was really impressed with the way that Roberts, Munie, and Floriani played. I think that the youth actually was one of our strengths in that back line. I think that San Diego, they're a team that they're good on the ball. They can play very quickly, but I think the speed that the back three had made it to where they could keep up with the players that San Diego had. Dreyer, who can play in a ball really quickly, send long balls. Pellegrino as well, obviously a familiar face on the other's team. Irving Lozano, a big name. I thought they played really, really well. It was also interesting to see Buda and Benji. I actually was pretty impressed with the two of them as well. More so Buda, actually. I feel like he is a player we haven't really been too familiar with playing at that left wing back position. Obviously, he usually plays a bit higher up. But I thought he did a good job. He was tracking back, and I didn't feel like it was a liability. Like you mentioned, the last time we saw that back three also was in Austin. It did look ugly, but if you take that game away, these are Reed Roberts and Floriani specifically have had good games for us. And, I have to give credit to Bruce Arena for maybe making the unpopular choice and starting them and to have it pay off the way it did.
For my view, I was in the away end, so I didn't have a great tactical view, that the TV or the broadcast gives you. I remember seeing some of those over-the-top through balls that San Diego was sending, which we've seen them do against us. And I mean, really, a lot of opponents have done that against us. You would see a lot of times of them having to, run with the San Diego forward and, try to get to that ball first. And there were some moments where some of the challenges looked a little bit, at least to me, like they were yellow, maybe even orange card, if that's a thing, worthy of something like that. I remember there was one play, I think it was either Floriani or Reed Roberts going up against Lozano 1v1, and I thought it was going to be like a card and maybe even a sending off. But to my surprise, they didn't get sent off, and then I watched it back and I was like, no, yeah, that was a very clean tackle. And I think there was a lot of moments like that for me in the box too, sliding challenges, whatever it may be, that being in the stands, I thought that we were going to, have a penalty called against us. The whole stadium booing the ref for not making the call. And to see those challenges be so clean, I was very, very impressed with how they played. Overall, as a unit, they held it down. And I think tactically, too, we got this one a lot better We've talked about the highline a lot. I think in the beginning of the game, we were seeing that, but I mean, you get a goal so early. I think it was like, 13th, 14th minute. And then you have that luxury of, okay, we don't have to commit so much. And that's kind of what we've seen, basically like the way LAFC played against us, where they get the early goals and they can just sit back, absorb pressure. And I think the Quakes did that. And I think you look at the stats, possession, attack, passing, all that, like San Diego led in all of those categories. And that's something that we've seen the Quakes do all year long, lead in those categories against other teams, but then not lead in the one stat that matters most, which is, of course, the scoreline. And so we've had this theory, or at least I've had this theory building up, that like if the Quakes just commit to having numbers in behind, they commit to defending as a unit, they can defend. These players are good enough for it. This season that we've conceded so many goals just because they're caught in bad positions. But in this game, we saw that. And a lot of plays, when aside from the first one that was like the first 3 minutes, aside from that one, basically every single attacking play that San Diego had, we would always have 3-4 players minimum, and a lot of the times it was 5-6 players committed to defending, like the entire back line, the entire midfield. They were really bought into defending, and I think that is one of the biggest changed variables in terms of how we got this result.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I think the early goal is so important. And we saw, like you said, we've been on the receiving end of that these past couple of games. Yeah, game state was a big part of this result. The fact that we could get an early goal. And, even after that, right, we still had a few looks at goal. There was obviously that other chance that Martinez had not too long after the goal that was scored, after a beautiful ball in from Christian Espinosa. But yeah, to get that goal early on and to just be able to hold on to that, I feel like this is the most committed I've ever seen the Quakes defend in this season, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really, really impressed. I say this in the best way possible. The Quakes looked awful to play against for a large part of that game. And I think that's a compliment that they should really take and have pride in. And I think that's something that we've wanted. Again, I have to give credit to Bruce Arena as well in terms of the personnel that he had on the field. Obviously, you need good defenders to defend well. Ronaldo Vieira, I felt like there was kind of some of that sloppiness on the ball that we were a bit concerned about when we heard about him signing. We kind of did some research on him. But defensively, he's a physical player. The backline as well, they're tall, they're physical, they're young, they're fast. Harks as well, he's always going to give you 90 minutes of physicality. And I also want to give some credit to Bruce Arena on the substitutions as well. It might have actually been the home game against San Diego where we saw that double midfield substitution that ended up just costing us, really. And he did bring on Bolaru and Buck, as he did in that game, but the difference was he didn't take off both midfielders to put on an entirely new midfield. He kept Harks for the full 90. We kind of went back into a 5-3-2, which is a lot easier to defend with. And, you also have Benji come off. You put Buddha on that right wing back position, on that right foot. You also have Victor Costa come in, who we've always, despite maybe some shortcomings on the ball, he's always been fantastic in the duels. And I just felt like, the Quakes were really up for the pressure that San Diego was putting on to time and time again. And of course, the man who probably deserved the man of the match, Danielle, who, honestly, I kind of overlooked it, but it's something that you mentioned as well about not having those stellar performances that we kind of got used to seeing. And this was a game where he did step up when we needed him. Kind of like that game in Vancouver maybe a few seasons ago, or maybe even like Berkey that we saw the last weekend, where just he was up for it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe not to that extent, but he did have some good saves and he deserved the clean sheet.
Yeah, I think it's something I've been saying for the past 5 match days, that Daniel just hasn't had those performances. And like you just said, he had 2-3 game defining moments in this match. And I mean, also, not to take anything away from Daniel, but I do think it's also maybe some fortune went our way, and how San Diego were missing a lot of shots. Being in the stands when they announced Pellegrino's name in the starting 11, at least from our away section, there were so many people booing. And I understand why they did that, right? He just has had a bad year for us this year. He was associated last year with, the worst Quakes team in our franchise's history. And I get it. And then to see him miss 2 goals in this game, which are goals that are harder to miss than to score, and then somehow that misfortune is rubbing off on Chucky Lozano, on Dreyer, all those players that San Diego have that hurt us in the last game. Like honorary man of the match, I guess, or something. But
it was great to not have to be the ones like suffering through that for once.
Yeah, and I could tell from like the San Diego fans, it wasn't to the extent of like how Quakes fans felt in that Open Cup game against Sacramento this year, where it just missed like 4 or 5, or like basically open net goals. But it was like you could definitely feel that it was lots of frustration. It was definitely getting there. Like on a, I guess like a human personal level, like I do feel bad, but like I want the 3 points, and like if that's what it's gonna take, like that's what it's gonna take. I'm sorry, I'm celebrating the 3 points regardless of how we get them. But yeah, overall, fantastic defensive performance, fantastic performance between the posts, and just enough up top to get that one goal that got us the 3 points. So round of applause for the Quakes and for Bruce Arena for getting this one right. Now, as we're winding down, going close to the season, we can kind of see how some of these permutations are starting to play out. It still is going to be pretty difficult for the Quakes. We're currently sitting 9th, 2 points behind 8th, which is a pretty good spot to be at. But the team in 10th, which is FC Dallas, do have a game in hand. So there's a little bit of danger there. But looking at the level of opponents that these teams have to play against, it honestly is pretty evenly difficult, if that makes sense. I think getting over the San Diego team was probably going to be the toughest challenge for the Quakes, just given that, yes, Vancouver is going to be a tough challenge, but at least with Vancouver, we did beat them at home, so that kind of gives us some confidence. And now that we did beat San Diego, that gives a team, and I mean, even the fans, a lot more confidence that, yes, we can go on the road and we can beat Vancouver. But it's still going to be difficult. We talked about this last week. Like, you got to have the hope. And until decision day, I think the Quakes are going to be in it, even if we get a negative result in Vancouver, just depending on how other results around the league play out.
Yeah, definitely. And it is worth mentioning that Vancouver have only gotten 2 points out of their last 2 games. Not to say that they're in a massive slump or anything, but you're right. This is a team that we have beat before this season. We've gone to their stadium. We have won there before. I imagine they're going to be up for it, but I do think that it is possible. And also, aside from the Quakes games, like you mentioned, the other teams that we're competing with for playoff positions, they definitely don't have easy run-ins. Even FC Dallas, who play Galaxy home and away, Galaxy, it's pretty funny to make fun of them, but I will say in the past couple months, they have been a bit better. I don't think that really any of these teams have, easy games coming into this. So it can really go either way. Another thing too, like we saw in San Diego, the Earthquakes have been good away from home. And part of that, I think, can be a concern as to why we can't be getting the results at home. That is slightly a concern for me, with that Austin game. I remember last season we had a decision day game against Austin. Nothing to play for, but, still didn't go our way. And after a few ugly results against Austin, I definitely don't want to see that as like 3 points guaranteed. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts going into these last couple of weeks of the regular season.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Even though Austin are lower in the standings, somehow now have more concerns over that game than away at Vancouver. But we'll just have to wait and see how this plays out. And yeah, we'll keep updating how these permutations go as these matches unfold. And then between the Vancouver and the Austin game, we will have a week off. And I think at that point is when we'll be like, okay, this is what the Quakes need. These are all the situations, all the scenarios for which the Quakes go through. And as long as we can reach decision day with there being, a way to playoffs, I don't know what more we can ask for. Because, I mean, if you would have asked us, after the St. Louis game where we had, 2-3 consecutive losses, it honestly just felt like the season was over. And I do think that this win against San Diego just kind of flips that switch of like, hey, no, the Quakes are still in this. It's going to be tough, but Goonies never say die. And no one ever said that being a Quakes fan was going to be easy. So if we do make it, it'll in some ways, it will feel even better that we did pull it off right at the end.
You're right. But that would be the very Quakes way of making it into the playoffs.
Yeah. And that's why we love them. But yeah, I think that's all we have for this one. Luis, any last thoughts? Or
never say die.
Never say die. Couldn't have said it better myself. So yeah, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. We'll be here for the next games and everything in between. So thanks again. Let us know what you're thinking, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.